Today, we're going to be making this Batman costume from a few readily available materials that you could make yourself. We'll start off right at the center with the chest plate. These parts here have their edges slightly beveled to fit together better on an angle. Some of the edges have a slight overhang so that the pieces can overlap slightly. These two main panel pieces allow everything to be built up around them, and they add structure too. And that makes up half of the chest plate. The other side is literally exactly the same, so let's speed through it. And that looks pretty good. At this point, the two halves are only being held together by the supports. That can be fixed by adding a couple small parts to bridge the gap. We are kind of building up a center support for the batarang to rest on, because I think that would be pretty cool for it to be removable. After that, I glued on a piece of cardboard to close up the back. Now, onto the batarang. As you can see, it looks pretty complicated. I'll start off with the bits at the center, making sure they fit well, and then moving up. And here's the completed chest piece, with all the batarang components. They fit in pretty well at this point, besides them not actually being connected. All the small details really help this piece stand out. The shoulders are mainly made up of two basic components with a bunch of darts. Cutting these darts, or triangular slits, allow the piece to be curved into 3 dimensions instead of just being a flat piece of cardboard. I then attach this part to a main central support, and this weird lower flange piece is added. Right now, the shoulders are a bit flimsy. A couple of support parts on the underside can really help strengthen it up. Here's all the main upper body components all constructed. But there's this one other piece, the cowl. In case you haven't already noticed, I have a whole separate video on how to make the cowl that's not going to be covered here. So you can go check it out right here, after this video of course. Well, the biceps are made of a lot of parts, but I'll lay them out for you here. The biceps base layer is made up of 2 parts, a curved piece that covers most of your arm, and a skinny rectangle that sits right at the back. The second layer has a few raised panel parts that give it a little bit of detail, but the real detail comes from the third layer, full of a bunch of complex triangular parts. The back has a small rib detail that I made with a thin sheet of corrugated cardboard I just peeled off the top layer. The only other things to add are a small flange at the top and the bottom. The neck guard begins with a bunch of support pieces, but we can't really visualize how these fit together right now. So let's fix that. There we go, that's a bit better. This piece will act as a central support for these curved bits that are the base of the collar. When gluing onto the supports, make sure not to use too much glue, because these need to come out later. This next piece did have a couple of problems, but I'll get to that a bit later. It goes on at the front and has another dart at the back, so it can curve in 2 directions. There's a second layer that goes on top of the base collar piece, so I'm just adding that here. I need to bring these 2 front edges together just a bit more, so I can do that by gluing them together with a piece of cardboard. Okay, here's the problem. The little notch detail on the side of the piece was way too far forward. So I had to move it back, which meant cutting out a chunk of the neck piece. There it is. Much better. These bits are for the top and the bottom of the gauntlet. There are a couple of V-groove undercuts, or channels cutting almost all the way through on this main piece, just so it can curve together a bit better. And this piece goes right on the side. All of these parts are for the second layer that go on top of this piece. This piece is just a tiny little support to get the bottom lined up and facing the right direction. We can start by taking the main piece and gluing the V-grooves together, and then adding the side panel on. Then the bottom can be glued after all the edge pieces get a bit of a bevel. All these detail strips can go on next. Alright, this is where things get complicated. I want my gauntlets to hinge open and close, so I'm starting off by adding a nice foundation of barbecue skewers. For the actual hinge, I use pen tubes and a wooden dowel. Here's a couple of details I made. There's 6 of them, and they're evenly spaced out all along the sides, 3 on each. Next up, we gotta cut holes for the elastic straps to go through. If you're wondering what that's for, it holds all those weird missile looking things. I think they're for the grappling hooks, but I'm not sure. That is pretty much it, apart from covering up the corrugation by peeling off the top layer of cardboard and gluing it onto all the unwanted exposed ugly edges to make it look a little nicer. After adding a couple more details, these boys are finished. The resining process is pretty simple. Take parts A and B of your resin and mix them together until they're fully combined. Make sure they're equal parts and then just apply it evenly. Two coats on each side of whatever you're working on should work great. At this point, if we try to move on to the painting, nothing's going to stick to the armor pieces. The resin is just too smooth. However, this can be fixed by sanding down the outer layer with some rough sandpaper. Wiping everything away with a damp cloth is also a great way to get rid of dust. And a quick coat of filler primer provides a surface that the filler I use can stick to. I didn't cover it here, but you can find this process in many of my other videos. One last pass with some fine grit sandpaper, and these guys are ready for their final colors. Most of them are black. Much like the cowl, this piece needs some leather work. I roughened it up with some sandpaper so the contact cement could get a bit more grip. I did 2 coats, waiting 15 minutes in between. Of course, I gotta do the fake stitching again, so I broke out the puffy paint and got straight to work. Here's how it looks next to the mask. I think it looks pretty amazing. It matches super well. The chest plate needs a bit of dry brushing on the inner area where the batarang will rest. But apart from that, I need to attach a bit of fabric. I found this really cool textured stuff online that looks absolutely perfect. Of course, I'll leave a link for it in the description. I decided to glue it on with contact cement because pretty much nothing else worked. After a bit of weathering, which I'll go over later, that was the finished piece. I freehanded literally the entire design for the abs. I just made sure to look at a good reference image, and I think it turned out alright. There it is. Let's put it on foam. All these blue pieces you see here are 6mm foam. This one is 4, and this final one is 2. Because of this ridiculous blue color I decided to use, I'm going to paint the corners black. The same exact fabric is being used here as everywhere else on the costume. I cut out one big panel piece for all the armor panels to glue onto. Mapping it out with some blue tape made it really easy to find out where to put the glue. I very carefully lined up all the parts and pushed them into place. You gotta use a lot of pressure here. Now for the weathering. I mixed up a very light gray color and just dry brushed it all over the panels, mainly focusing on the center of each one. This really gave it a worn look. A bit of brown paint on some of the edges helps too. Of course, gray puffy paint for the stitching around the edges, and we are good to go. Time to break out the sewing machine. Huge thanks to my friend Tyler for letting me borrow this. You a real one. This is the shirt I decided to go with. Now, it seems a bit odd at first, but if I cut the hood off, I think it could work. And here it is with a bit more work done. I got the center spine thing going, with a zipper going down each side. These just need to be sewn on. Take a look at that. It's time to tackle those parachute-looking details at the back. I don't even know what to call them. So, I made a bunch of loops for the paracord to run through. These all get sewn onto one long piece and then attached to the back of the shirt. You can pause here to see a bit more of how that works. Well, it's time to attach the abs to the shirt. I've marked out here where it's supposed to go. I'm going to sew along here, here, and here. Make sure to burn your loose threads down to prevent the stitching from loosening up. A quick little test fit, which marks the end of the shirt. So the pants are up next. I'm going to focus on these 3 main armor panels. All of these parts are on 4mm thick foam, and I'm using the same techniques to cover them in fabric. I did a bit of weathering on those armor panels too. And the sides of the legs have that same parachute pattern as the shirt. I know it's a pain, but I did it. The shoulder and bicep armor pieces are supposed to be a very specific color that can't really be achieved through spray paint. So I created my own by mixing black, white, and a little bit of silver together. I painted it over everything and gave the corners a bit of silver dry brushing. This piece goes at the bottom of the bicep. It's a really cool little thing that I made with a couple of bits of plastic, and it adds a little bit of detail. I'm threading that elastic straight through the gauntlets with those holes we made earlier. This allows it to grip onto those weird missile things. I need to glue on just a couple more details on the gauntlets, like these side bits of elastic. And of course, the fins are added, making sure they're evenly spaced out. Well, I got a package. And here they are. These are the exact same boots they use in the movie. They're called the CAS 03 combat boots. They're Austrian. The boot covers are very, very simple. It's pretty much just a glorified leather rectangle with a bit of fake stitching on it and a couple little bits jutting out here and there. The hand plates are really simple. It's just a bit of cardboard with some leather glued on top. And now, they're only missing the stitching. The gloves I used are knockoff Mechanics Breacher gloves that I found on Amazon. They were really cheap, because they're not really the real ones. But who cares? These go on with a bit of Velcro. The last detail goes on the left glove, which is a little tiny display. Alrighty, time to work on the belt, and there's a lot of details that go on it. This is that tiny little sticky bomb canister that goes on the left side of the belt buckle. It's pretty simple construction, and it looks a little bit like that. You can see that. And here's a little progress photo on the belt buckle. These are some make-fast buckles that need to replace the normal ones for the holster. So I need to take these out and sew the new ones in. A bit of a risky move, but I gotta cut the belt in half and feed it through each side of the belt buckle. The last things to do are to paint and weather the sticky bomb canister and the belt buckle. I didn't film much of making the cape, so here's a diagram of how it works. It's a big rectangle with a few pleats that fold together and give it a really nice, clean look that flows down the back. They overlap in the front, and the whole thing attaches with a bit of Velcro. After that, the whole costume is done.
November 3rd, Thursday. Gotham is overrun by criminals, robberies, muggings, and murders. Citizens are scared to go out at night, but in the background lurks the shadows, and the criminals fear the shadows, or what could be hiding in them, because I am the shadows. I am the darkness. I'm vengeance.
That's the 7-month process of how I turned ordinary items into this awesome Batman costume. And if you're crazy enough to want to make this yourself, eventually I'll have the templates posted on my Etsy store. But up until then, that's it.